Okay. Well, as if you've ever been to Disneyland, you've heard this. Keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle till it comes to a complete stop. We're going to be in for a ride with lesson 99. Um, Primarily, we're going to be in Matthew, the 24th chapter. And this lesson 99 in Roper's book and stuff, it's divided up into two parts. The first is the signs leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem, and the second part is the second coming of Christ. Okay? Now, there are some, I will tell you right off the bat, that in the Brotherhood, scholars who believe that all of Matthew 24, all of it, has to do with the prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem. And as we go through the lesson, well, I'm going to try to point these things out, and up to you to decide what you think. But that's where we're going with this lesson number 99. As we start, after Jesus had given a list of events not directly related to the destruction of Jerusalem, we call them, remember, the non-signs. Okay, he identified the sign for which his followers should be looking for. He said in chapter 24, verse 15, I'll read, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." Mark's account has the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be. It's really interesting that sensationalists enjoy speculating on those fancy words, the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be. But if you read over in Luke's account, chapter 21, verse 20, Jesus simply said, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation or her destruction is near." Pretty simple when you read it that way. Christ reminded his listeners that the abomination of desolation had been spoken through Daniel the prophet in various combinations, or found several times in the book of Daniel. Chapter 9, 26 and 27, 11 and 31, 12 and 11. Now, it's interesting that such terminology was apparently applied to the Romans because the entrance of heathen armies into Jerusalem would have been an abomination to all Jews. Any idea why? Think about the Roman standards. What image do they have on them? Caesar. Yeah. The Roman standards had the images of Caesar that constituted idolatry in the eyes of the Jews. Therefore, it was blasphemous even to have them near the Holy Temple. Josephus wrote of conflicts between the Jews and the Roman armies regarding this very abomination. Any thoughts or questions to this point? Yes? I don't know. Anybody help me? I can't think of any. Remember, the temple was completely destroyed in AD 70, okay? And what this is talking about is the um, uh, signs leading to the destruction. Um, Anybody think of anything? Let me do some more research, okay? And I'll see if I can find that answer to that. Good question. Thank you. Yeah. Um, okay. So in verses 16 through 18 of Matthew 24, Jesus tells his followers what to do when the real signs come. Let me read that to you, please. 16 through 18. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must turn back to get his cloak. Do not get his cloak. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm putting that in. What's the bottom line here? In fact, before I ask that, Luke goes even further and says, those who are in the country must not enter the city. What's the bottom line? Get out. Yeah, get out quickly. If you remember how the houses were made, whether it was single story, double, 2-story, 3-story, they had what kind of roofs? Flat, because people at night slept up there. So they're saying if that happened to come during the night, don't try to go back down into the house. But all those houses would have had an outside stairwell to escape. Just get out. Don't go back in for anything. Keepsakes. Just use those stairs on the outside and run. And if you're working in the fields, don't even go back to get a cloak. You see, when it was time to flee Jerusalem, the Christians were to leave their goods behind. Why is that? Well, they'll be destroyed. But remember, material things can be replaced. Human life can't. Also, think about this. Many a refugee in times of war has found that his goods impeded travel, slowed him down. It would allow him maybe to get caught by pursuing armies. And it's common sense that would tell you that one who travels light can make his escape faster and more freely. Any thoughts on that? Additional comment? Oh, yeah. Yeah, think about Lot's wife, looking back. If you don't do what God says, you're going to pay the price. Jesus added in Matthew 24:19, you also find it in Mark 13:17 and Luke 21:23. He says this, but woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Now, those days are referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. What does Jesus mean here when he says, woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing? Let's do the pregnant one first. Why? No, they can't. No, they can't. Depending upon the stage of pregnancy a woman's in, of course, typically, I'm going to put myself on the spot here. Be careful. First trimester is a lot of morning sickness. Ladies, help me out if I'm wrong here. A lot of times. Second trimester, baby's starting to grow, aches and pains. You have some cravings. And in the last trimester, it feels like you got a bowling ball in your belly. So yeah, they could not, it'd be hard for them to travel. They can't travel fast. What's the deal with the nursing babies? What would that? Well, they can't be separated from their mothers, okay? And I have been told that in biblical days, babies were nursed a lot longer than they are today. So they might have been, toddlers, so to speak. And anybody knows when you're getting ready to go on a trip, having children makes it more difficult. Getting ready. I can remember when I was a little kid and we would travel back and forth from California to Kansas. We had an old 54 Plymouth and then later on a 59 Chevrolet Impala. Pretty neat car today. Remember how the back seat was? It was a bench seat, and then you had the floorboard with a big hump over, okay, for the drivetrain. Yeah, Mom and Dad used to put 2 suitcases on each side and throw blankets down. And my brother and I, that's where we slept, played, ate, and everything. We didn't worry about seatbelts back then. But now today, just packing for a trip is exhausting. You got to remember DVD, iPad, sound machines, medicines, favorite pillow, blanket, toy. It's a lot of work today, right? Any thoughts or comments? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's for sure. Yeah. It's so very true. No. And um, obviously, when a woman nurses, she needs lots of nutrients. And that's one of the things that would be hard to find, the right ones anyway. Um, Jesus also said, but pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. Why say that? Well, yeah, the winter would be hard, right? Anytime you travel in the winter. Yeah. And the gates of the city would be locked. So that would be a reason why you pray for that not to happen. Now, evidently, their prayers of those Christian Jews were answered because the Romans came in the spring. So that's kind of interesting. Um, so, with all that in mind, what would one's location, whether one was pregnant or nursing, the season or the day of the week, have to do with the second coming? Nothing at all. Kind of a trick question there. Nothing at all. All these would be significant factors, though, when it came to fleeing from Jerusalem. Brian. Yeah, I know where you're going with that, and there may have been for warfare or something like that, um, because who wouldn't go in to save the lamb, as the story goes. Yeah, but yeah, the doors would have been locked. Yeah, yeah, good question, good thought. Um, yes, I'm sorry. Yes. Huge. Correct. Well, we know that the siege, and we're going to get to that in a little bit, went on and off for 3 years. Yeah. Well, and there was a reason why, and we'll get to that in a minute. Um, both Matthew and Mark add an inspired editorial comment where they say, let the reader understand. What does that mean? Pay attention. Yeah, listen carefully. Um, thus, subsequent, help me out. Subsequent history reveals that early Christians did understand Jesus' message, and they were able to escape Jerusalem when it was destroyed. Some may have left when they heard about the Roman armies that were approaching, or maybe they waited till they actually saw them over the hillside, come into view. Um, others were given that opportunity when the siege was lifted for a little bit period of time. Now I want to read something to you right out of Roper's book. It's on page 348 if you have the book with you. Down at the bottom, it says an interesting story was told by Eusebius, a church. I still have that. Need to go up on that thing. I was thinking about that. A church historian who lived about AD 300. There was a period of time when the siege of Jerusalem was temporarily lifted. The Emperor Vitellius had died, and the general in charge of Jerusalem's destruction was Vespasian. The Roman Senate sent word to Vespasian that he was to succeed Vitellius as governor. When Vespasian left, his son Titus was made in charge, or Titus was made general in charge of the attack. During the change of command, this is interesting, there was a pause in the siege. Christians placed their trust in Jesus' word, used this opportunity to flee from Jerusalem and cross the Jordan River to the city of Pella. In this way, they escaped a horrible destruction. According to Eusebius, not one Christian was hurt during the siege. None of them perished. That's, to me, is amazing when you think about that. Where it talked about during the change of command, there was a pause. One of my favorite all-time movies is White Christmas with Bing Crosby. In fact, in my house, every Christmas Eve, we make it a tradition of watching that movie, and I've probably seen it 50 times. I don't know. Never get tired. I always cry at the end when the general comes walking in and everybody stands. But anyway, remember in the beginning of the movie when Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby have that little show going on up in front, and General Waverly shows up and sneaks in the back, and then as things happen, the new general who's going to take his place asks General Waverly, "Why are they having a show up in front lines here like that?" And he says, "Well, General, in a change of command, there's always a slip up." And I thought that was interesting that they kind of compared that. There was a pause, maybe a break in the communication or something. But it gave the opportunity for the Jewish Christians to get out. And that was something. And if that is true about not one Christian hurt during the siege and none of them perished, that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Any thoughts on that or comments? Okay. The next section in Matthew 24 describes the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus foresaw that it would be terrible. Let me read to you Matthew 24:21 through 22. It says, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." Mark 13:19 through 20 says pretty much the same thing. Let me read Luke's account because that's important. Luke 21, starting in verse 22. "Because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled." Then he gives the warning about the pregnant ladies and nursing babies. "Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled under the foot of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." Pretty harsh words, huh? Yeah, they're extreme. But history reveals that the reality matched the prediction. It was bad. Jerusalem was under siege off and on, as I mentioned earlier, for 3 years. Long time. The siege began when the city was swollen with pilgrims for the Passover. During the siege, those trapped inside the city resorted to desperate measures to survive. If you want to take a city or a house with and you surround it, right? You surround it. And what would be the hardest thing to replace for those people inside the city? Food. Yeah, you starve them out. And if you read in 2 Kings 6, you might want to write this down because this will curl your eyebrows. 2 Kings 6, 24 through 30 is an example of the extreme measures taken to survive. Mothers boiled and ate their children. Yeah, read that. Interesting. Finally, in AD 77, of course, Titus succeeded in capturing Jerusalem. And when the Romans overran the city, they killed, as John said, Jews by the tens of thousands. Josephus said that 1.1 million perished during the siege and 97,000 were taken captive. Now, most present-day scholars are convinced that Josephus exaggerated. Okay? But even if you cut that number in half, think about the thousands and thousands of people who died or were captured, so that not a single Jew was left alive in the city or its vicinity. Pretty amazing. Wayne? Well, see, I mean, my understanding of just the population was not anything near that, but you would have had all the pilgrims coming in for the Passover. Yes, Jason? Yeah, and the other thing that makes it suspicious for me is there's a big difference between 1.1 million killed and only 97,000 captured. So I almost think it's maybe more in line. This possibly could have been a misprint. I don't know. Other thoughts or comments? Uh, Yeah, yeah, yep. True. Yeah. No, you're right. So it very well could be. Yes, Jason. Yeah. We just know that it was a lot. We can all agree on that, I think, that it was a lot. Huh? Yes, very much so. Yeah. Now, the Romans, they tore down the city, right? Including the temple, and they burned it. We see that in Matthew 22 and 7. The fires melted the gold in the temple, and the soldiers literally, and this is where this comes from, left no stone unturned in their efforts to reclaim the metal. Remember what Jesus said earlier, that not one stone would be left unturned or left upon another? It's interesting to note that only one stone from the temple and parts of another have been identified positively by archaeologists today. People who visit can hardly believe that it has ever been inhabited. If you read or looked in the back of Roper's book, there's some pictures in the appendix of Jerusalem, what's left. Um, Only a few walls remain around Jerusalem or from Jerusalem of Christ's day, including the famed Wailing Wall. The site of the Jewish temple is now occupied by a mosque known as the Dome of the Rock. So there's not much left. It just proves to me the truth of the Bible. Any thoughts or questions, Brian? Uh-huh. Right? Well, and those who listened and got out. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good point. Other comments? Okay. After Jesus describes the destruction of Jerusalem, he gives them a warning. And the warning has to do with false prophets and false Christ. Matthew 24:24 is worth noting. It says this: For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. And when they talk about signs and stuff, what are we talking about? Miracles? No, no. But I think about magicians of today. You know, they can do some amazing tricks that you would, if you were a betting man, bet probably your life's earnings that that's not true, or that how did he do that? So what Jesus is telling them is be aware that they're going to show you some maybe pretty amazing things, but don't believe them. Don't believe them. Mark, you have a comment or getting ready to? Yeah. No, obviously not, because he was real. You know, people, Jack. That's right. That's right. And a lot of these false Christs, false prophets, you know, tried to set up, you know, different sects and stuff, sectors and things like that. But none of them, according to history, you know, really held. Uh, Obviously, except what Christians are still around. You know, that was an interesting point that was made. People would start rumors he is here or he is there. Christ said, "Do not believe them." Do not believe them. And the reason not to believe them is that when Jesus at last returns, whenever that is, nobody's going to have to announce it. There's not going to be a doubt in anybody's mind. Every knee will bow before him. Um, and he says, because everyone will know. It will be like lightning flashes across the sky. Interesting. Notice in verse 28 of Matthew 24, says this: Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures. If you got the New King James Version, it says eagle. I don't know about any other translations, but there the vultures will gather. Any ideas what that might mean? Well, yeah, you can always know where A dead animal is by the birds flying around it. That's true. Scavengers, absolutely. Three possible answers was given. One, the corpse in verse 28 is the decayed carcass of the nation of Israel in its final throes. Analogy there. Number two, others connect it to verse 27 before and say, just as sure as the vultures know of the dead, which they do, there is no doubt of Jesus' coming. And the third possibility, according to Roper's other commentators, believe the vultures are the false prophets and false Christ who victimized the distressed people of Jerusalem in their final hours. You know, if I'm leaning towards one, it's probably the last one. But any thoughts on that? Yeah. Yeah. To be aware of what may happen. Okay. All right. This brings us to one of the more difficult sections of this lesson of the Bible. I'm going to ask Jason, could you read Matthew 24, 29, 31? Wayne, would you read Mark 13, 24 through 27? And Jack, could you read Luke 21, 25 through 28? Okay. Again, Jason, when you get it, 24, 29 through 31. Thank you. Thank you. Wayne, 13, Mark 24 through 27, please. Okay, thank you. And then Jack, 21, 25 through 28, Luke. All three kind of pretty much say roughly the same thing, right? We all agree with that. The terminology in these verses in all three of the Gospels certainly sounds like what? Like what? The end. Yeah, the second coming. Okay? If, as many believe, that Jesus jumped from topic to topic in this discourse, okay, which we talked about earlier, perhaps he was referring to that event. However, and this is the key for this, if the phrase all these things, which is found in Matthew 24, verse 24, I'm sorry, 24, verse 33, includes those verses that we just read, which would be a natural assumption, right? Then Christ must have had another event in mind. Let that stir around a little bit. If, as many believe, Jesus jumped from topic to topic in his discourse, perhaps he was referring to that event, the second coming. However, what makes you think twice is if the phrase all these things, which is found in verse 34 of Matthew 24, includes verses 29 through 31, again, which would be a natural assumption, Christ must have had another event in mind. Now, what really throws a wrench into it is the word immediately in verse 29 of Matthew 24. I'll be honest, according to Roper 2, this gives us difficulty. Gives us difficulty. If the second coming of Christ is far removed from the events surrounding the destruction of Jerusalem, why did he use the word immediately? Now, as we search for other possibilities, we need to keep in mind what we've talked about before, that Jesus' listeners were familiar with the apocalyptic language. Okay? They understood it better than we do. The dramatic descriptions of the heavenly bodies being thrown into convulsions is given next in verse 29. While this could be taken as a series of literal events transpiring when Jesus returns, okay, it is usually regarded as symbolism in the style of the Old Testament prophets, Isaiah 13, 10 through 16, and Joel 2, 10. All of the terms used in Matthew 24, 29 through 31, and the related passages are used elsewhere in the Bible to refer to a variety of catastrophic events. Okay? For instance, where it talked about the sun, the moon, and the stars, symbolism is used to refer to the fall of kings and kingdoms. Isaiah 13, verse 1, and also 9 through 11. Again, in Isaiah 34, 4 through 5, talking about the fall of Eden. Just as today, for example, we use the expression earth shaking to refer to momentous events, right? Oh, that's earth shaking, something big. And so, as we interpret Matthew 24, 29 through 31, we need to keep in mind at least three facts, and this will help us, I think. Jesus said that the event or events of verse 29 through 31 would take place immediately after the tribulation of destruction of Jerusalem. Find that in verse 29. Verse 34 indicates that the event or events took place during the lifetime of the generation then living. That's an important piece of information. And the terminology of verses 29 through 30 can refer to events other than the second coming. Any thoughts or comments on that so far? Yeah. Yeah. Our time is over, but I encourage you to get in and read deep stuff and look at all different commentators' theories on this. It was an eye opener for me. I tell you that much. Um, any closing thoughts or comments? Yes, Jeanette. Yeah. Mosque. Yeah. Yes, man. Yeah. We will pick up with the comment with this in mind, what we just talked about. We'll look at some reasonable explanations or renditions of the meaning of Matthew 24:29 through 31. Thank you so very much. Great.